My parents stood on my front porch and demanded $450,000. My mother said it calmly. "We raised you for 14 years. You owe us." My father nodded beside her. My brother stared at the ground. No apology, no hesitation. Just a number. $450,000. For raising a child they threw out. I leaned against the doorframe and listened. For a moment I didn't speak. The afternoon was quiet. My street was the kind of place where neighbors mowed their lawns on Saturdays and waved politely when they passed. A place my grandmother would have loved. My mother cleared her throat. Well, I smiled slightly. "Sure," I said. Then I pulled out my phone. "Let me call my lawyer." The silence that followed was immediate. My father's jaw tightened. My mother blinked once. My brother finally looked up. That was the moment they stopped talking. But to understand how we got to that front porch, you have to go back 20 years, back to a different house. A smaller one. Back when I was 14 years old and still believed parents always protected their children. My name is Emily. And the first time my family threw me away, it happened on a Tuesday night. I remember the smell first. Burnt spaghetti sauce. My mother had been distracted while cooking. She always got distracted when she was angry. My brother Mark was standing beside the kitchen counter, arms folded across his chest. He was 17 then, tall, confident. The kind of boy teachers described as promising. The kind parents believed without question. My father stood near the doorway with his hands on his hips. "Tell us the truth," he said. I looked between them. "I am." My mother slammed a wooden spoon against the counter. "The money is gone." I didn't answer, because I already knew what was coming. Mark spoke quietly. I saw her take it. That was the lie. Simple, clean, easy to believe. My father turned toward me. "Did you steal it?" "No." My voice sounded smaller than I intended. My mother laughed once, a sharp sound. "You always were jealous of your brother. I didn't take anything." Mark shrugged slightly. Then he avoided my eyes. My father walked to the kitchen drawer and pulled out the empty envelope. $500 had been inside. Birthday money from our grandmother. He placed the envelope on the table like evidence. "Explain this." "I can't." My mother crossed her arms. "So you admit it?" "No, you're lying." I looked at Mark again. He still wouldn't meet my eyes. Something about that moment felt unreal, like watching a play where everyone else already knew the ending. My father exhaled slowly. "I'm not raising a thief. I'm not one." "Then where's the money I don't know?" Mark spoke again. "I told you." My mother nodded. "That settles it. That was all it took. No investigation, no questions, just a decision." My father pointed toward the hallway. "Pack a bag." The words hung in the air. "What you heard me." My mother turned back to the stove as if the conversation were finished. "You can stay somewhere else until you learn some responsibility." I stood there for several seconds, waiting, expecting someone to say they didn't mean it. But no one did. Mark shifted his weight. Then he walked out of the kitchen. I went to my room. The house felt strange suddenly, like it had already forgotten I lived there. I packed a backpack, 2 shirts, a pair of jeans, my toothbrush. 14 years of life reduced to what could fit in a single bag. When I returned to the kitchen, my parents were sitting at the table. My father didn't look up. My mother folded her hands together. "You made this choice," she said. "I didn't. Actions have consequences." I stood near the door. "Where am I supposed to go?" My father shrugged. "Not here." Outside, the air was colder than I expected. I stepped onto the porch. The door closed behind me with a soft click. No one followed. No one called my name. I walked down the driveway slowly. My backpack felt heavier with every step. The streetlights had just turned on. Most houses in the neighborhood were glowing with dinner-time warmth. I stood on the sidewalk for several minutes, not crying, just thinking. There was only one place I could go. My grandmother's house was 3 blocks away. She lived alone in a small white bungalow with a sagging front porch and a garden she never stopped tending. Her porch light was on when I arrived. I knocked once, then again. The door opened slowly. She looked at me, at the backpack, at the expression on my face. She didn't ask a single question. She stepped aside and opened the door wider. "Come in," she said. "You're safe here." I didn't realize until much later that those 4 words would change the rest of my life. She didn't ask questions that night. My grandmother had a way of understanding things without needing every detail. She closed the door behind me. Then she took my backpack gently and set it on the kitchen chair. "You must be hungry," she said. I shook my head. "I'm okay." She studied my face for a moment. Then she nodded. "That's all right, too." The kitchen smelled like chamomile tea and lemon cleaner. It was small and warm, the kind of place where every object had been in the same spot for years. She poured hot water into 2 mugs. No hurry, no judgment, just quiet movement. After a minute, she sat across from me at the table. "You can stay here as long as you need." That was it. No lecture, no interrogation, just certainty. I didn't cry then either. I only nodded. "Yes, ma'am." She smiled slightly. "You don't have to call me that." Old habits were hard to break. I stayed in the spare room. It had a narrow bed and a dresser that smelled faintly of cedar. The wallpaper was faded flowers. That night, I slept deeper than I expected. Exhaustion has a way of shutting down grief for a while. The next morning, she knocked softly on the door. "Breakfast is ready." I sat at the table while she cooked eggs and toast. Finally, she asked, "Do you want to tell me what happened?" I stared at the mug of tea in my hands. "Mark said I stole something." She nodded slowly. "Did you? No." She took a bite of toast. "I didn't think so. That was the entire investigation. No raised voices, no accusations, just quiet belief. My parents never came looking. No phone call, no apology. 14 years of raising a child ended without a conversation. The school counselor helped transfer my records. My grandmother signed the forms. I moved my clothes into the spare dresser. Life adjusted itself around the change. Slowly, carefully. She lived on a fixed retirement income. So I got a job after school at a small grocery store 2 blocks away, stocking shelves, cleaning aisles, counting change. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. My grandmother always waited up when I came home. The porch light stayed on, every night, no matter how late. She never complained. She never asked me to explain my parents. She simply made space. That's what kindness looks like when it's real. Years passed like that. High school, graduation, community college classes in the evenings, part-time jobs, then full-time work. Nothing about my life happened quickly. I built it piece by piece. Sometimes I wondered whether my parents ever thought about me, but wondering didn't change anything. My grandmother did something important during those years. She taught me how to live without resentment. Not through speeches, through routine. She gardened every morning, cooked simple meals, paid bills carefully, and she talked about the future like it was still worth planning. "People can disappoint you," she said once while trimming roses. But that doesn't mean life has to. When I was 18, I made her a promise. We were sitting at the kitchen table after dinner. She was reading the newspaper. I said quietly, "One day you won't have to worry about money again." She looked up. "I'm not worried. I know, but you shouldn't have to think about it at all." She smiled. "That's a kind promise." I kept it. Not in a dramatic way, just through work. After college, I joined a regional logistics company, entry-level scheduling, then operations, then project management. I stayed late, learned everything, took the jobs nobody else wanted. Slow progress is still progress. Within 10 years, I had built a small consulting firm focused on supply chain recovery. Companies call people like me when their operations are falling apart. I fix them, quietly, efficiently. The business grew faster than I expected. I bought my grandmother a new refrigerator, then a better roof. Then, eventually, the house next door when it went on sale. She still insisted on gardening, still insisted on cooking, but the worry disappeared. Exactly like I promised. She lived long enough to see my company grow, long enough to see the first employees join, long enough to know that the girl who arrived at her door with a backpack had built something stable. Then one winter morning she didn't wake up. She passed away peacefully in her sleep. I buried her beside my grandfather. The house felt impossibly quiet after that, but the porch light stayed on for a long time. Old habits, 20 years passed. I built a life that felt calm, work, friends, a house of my own in a quiet neighborhood. Then one afternoon the doorbell rang. I opened the door. My parents were standing on the porch, and my brother stood behind them. I opened the door halfway. At first I thought I was mistaken. 20 years changes people. Hair grays, faces narrow, postures stiffen. But recognition arrives quickly when it finally settles. My mother stood closest to the door. Her coat looked expensive. Her expression looked rehearsed. My father stood beside her with his hands folded awkwardly in front of him. My brother Mark lingered behind them. He looked older, not just older in years. Tired. For a moment, none of us spoke. The afternoon sun cut across the porch, leaving half their faces in shadow. My mother was the first to break the silence. "Well," she said, "it's been a long time." I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. It wasn't a conscious decision, just instinct. Some conversations don't belong inside your home. My father cleared his throat. "You've done well for yourself." It sounded less like admiration and more like an observation. I nodded once. "I've been busy." Mark still hadn't looked directly at me. My mother glanced at the house behind me. "This place is beautiful. Thank you." She hesitated. Then she said something that made the entire visit suddenly clear. "We need to talk about something important." Of course they did. People rarely appear after 20 years without a purpose. "What about?" I asked. My mother and father exchanged a quick look. Then she spoke again. "We raised you for 14 years. There it was. The past presented like a receipt. My father nodded slowly. That kind of responsibility comes with costs. I felt the faintest hint of disbelief. Not anger, just the quiet realization that some people never change. "What are you asking?" I said. My mother reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She handed it to me. I didn't take it. "What is it?" "A calculation," she said. My father spoke next. Food, housing, school expenses. Mark shifted his weight behind them, still silent. My mother finished the sentence calmly. "You owe us $450,000. The number landed with the same quiet weight it had earlier. 450,000. The cost of raising a child. My neighbor's lawnmower hummed somewhere down the street. A car drove past slowly. Normal life continued around us. I studied their faces carefully. My father looked determined. My mother looked satisfied. Mark looked uncomfortable. "You're serious," I said. My mother nodded. "You've clearly become successful." That success started with us. I almost smiled. The logic was remarkable. They had expelled me from their home at 14. Yet somehow that counted as parenting. My father added, "It's only fair." I leaned against the porch railing. "Fair." "Yes," my mother said. "You lived in our house. You ate our food. You attended our schools. My brother finally spoke. You should just pay it. His voice sounded strained. Make this simple. I looked at him then, for the first time since they arrived. Simple for who he didn't answer. My mother straightened her coat. We're not asking for charity. My father nodded. This is repayment. I thought about that word. Repayment. It suggested a debt. Debts require agreements. Agreements require consent. None of those things had existed 20 years ago. You're saying I owe you money, I said. My mother's voice softened slightly. You owe us gratitude, and gratitude can be expressed financially. My father gestured toward the house behind me. You've clearly done well. Mark finally lifted his eyes. You could pay it easily. There it was. The real reason they were standing on my porch. Not closure, not reconciliation. Opportunity. I studied them for another moment. Then I asked the only question that seemed worth asking. Why now? My mother looked surprised. What do you mean you waited 20 years? My father answered. We didn't know where you were. That's not true. He paused, then looked away. Mark spoke quietly. They found out about your company. That explained everything. Public business records, online articles. Success leaves a trail. My mother folded her arms. You should be proud we came to you directly. The statement was so absurd I almost laughed. Instead, I took out my phone. What are you doing? My father asked. I scrolled through my contacts. My mother's expression tightened. You're not taking this seriously. I am. Mark looked uneasy now. Emily. I finally met his eyes again. Sure, I said. Then I pressed the call button. Let me call my lawyer. The effect was immediate. My mother's lips parted. My father's posture stiffened. Mark looked like someone had removed the ground beneath his feet. For the first time since they arrived, they stopped talking. I held the phone to my ear. The call rang twice. Then a familiar voice answered. Daniel Reed. His tone was steady, professional. Calm in the way attorneys learn to sound after years of managing other people's problems. Hi, Dan. It's Emily. A brief pause. Emily. Everything all right? I glanced at the three people standing in front of me. My parents had frozen where they stood. Mark had finally lifted his eyes, fully watching my face like he was trying to read the next move before it happened. I have a situation, I said. Family, yes. Do you need me to come over? That might help. Another short pause. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I lowered the phone. My mother was staring at me now. You called a lawyer? Yes. My father shook his head slowly. That's unnecessary. Maybe. But it seems like the responsible step. My mother's voice sharpened. This is a family conversation. It stopped being that when you mentioned money. My brother ran a hand through his hair. You're overreacting. I leaned against the porch railing again. No, you are. He gestured toward the house behind me. You're doing well. Good for you. But this is just settling old accounts. Old accounts. That phrase hung in the air. I studied him quietly. You mean the lie, Mark flinched. Just slightly, but I saw it. My mother spoke quickly. That was 20 years ago. Yes. And it's irrelevant now. I nodded slowly. It was irrelevant then, too. My father crossed his arms. You're not still holding on to that. I'm not holding anything. I'm remembering. Mark shifted his weight. You don't understand what happened back then. I understand perfectly. You stole the money, he said. The lie came out automatically, like muscle memory. I watched him for a long moment. You're still saying that he didn't answer. My mother spoke instead. That's not the issue today. No. Today we're discussing fairness. Fairness again. The word had traveled a long way over the years. I glanced down the quiet street, then back at them. You're asking me to pay you for raising me. My father nodded once. Yes. And you believe that's reasonable? It is. Mark stepped forward slightly. Look, his voice sounded softer now. Just settle it. Why? So we can move on. Move on. Another interesting phrase. You moved on 20 years ago, I said. You closed the door. My mother frowned. That was discipline. That was exile. Mark looked away. For the first time since they arrived, he seemed uncomfortable enough to stop talking. We stood there in silence for a moment. The late afternoon sun had shifted lower. A breeze moved the leaves in the maple tree beside the porch. Then my father spoke again. You know something, Emily? What you turned out successful. Yes. And that success came from the values we taught you. That sentence almost impressed me. It was so confidently wrong. I didn't learn those values from you, I said. Then, where I didn't hesitate. Grandma. My mother's mouth tightened. She spoiled you. She saved me. My father exhaled slowly. That woman undermined this family. She gave me a home. Mark finally spoke again. His voice sounded quieter than before. She always liked you better. I looked at him. She liked honesty. The words landed harder than I intended. He shifted his gaze toward the street. Then the sound of a car approaching broke the silence. A dark sedan turned onto the curb and parked beside the mailbox. Daniel Reed stepped out. Tall, calm, gray suit. He walked up the path toward the porch with the relaxed confidence of someone who understood exactly how uncomfortable legal conversations could become. Emily, he said. Good to see you. Thanks for coming. He nodded toward my parents. Afternoon. My father straightened. Who are you, Daniel Reed? He offered a polite handshake that no one accepted. I'm Emily's attorney. My mother laughed nervously. That seems excessive. Daniel gave a small professional smile. It usually does. He looked at me. Would you like to explain the situation? I handed him the folded paper my mother had tried to give me earlier. He opened it carefully. His eyebrows lifted slightly as he read. Then he looked up. They're requesting repayment for childhood expenses. Yes. For 14 years. Yes. He folded the paper again. Then he turned toward my parents. I assume you're aware of the legal implications of this claim. My father frowned. What implications? Daniel's tone remained polite. In most jurisdictions, parents are legally responsible for the care of their minor children. That's not a debt. My mother crossed her arms. We sacrificed for her. Daniel nodded slightly. That's generally considered parenting. Mark finally spoke again. His voice sounded tight. You don't understand our family. Daniel looked at him. I don't need to. He gestured toward the paper. The law is very clear. My mother looked between us. You're saying we can't ask for repayment? You can ask. Daniel smiled politely. But you can't enforce it. The silence returned again, this time heavier. My father looked uncertain for the first time since arriving. My mother looked irritated. Mark looked like he wanted to disappear. Daniel folded the paper one more time. Then he handed it back to me. Emily, he said quietly. There's one more thing you should probably tell them. I looked at him. He nodded once. The truth. Daniel stepped back slightly. He gave me the space to speak. That was one thing I appreciated about him. He never tried to control the moment. He simply made sure the ground beneath it was solid. My parents were watching me now, waiting. My father's expression had shifted from confidence to irritation. My mother looked impatient. Mark looked uneasy. Daniel folded his hands calmly. "Go ahead," he said. So I did. 20 years ago, I said quietly, $500 disappeared from the kitchen drawer. My mother sighed. "We already went through this." "Yes. And you stole it." I shook my head. "No." Mark looked down at the porch boards. My father crossed his arms. "That's ancient history." "Not really." I looked directly at my brother. "Mark." He didn't respond. "Did you take the money?" The question hung in the air. Mark rubbed the back of his neck. "Why are we doing this? Because it's the truth." My mother stepped forward. "We're not here to rehash childhood drama." Daniel spoke gently. "Actually, you might want to hear this." My father glared at him. "This doesn't concern you." Daniel's expression didn't change. "I represent Emily. That makes it very much my concern." I turned back to Mark. "Did you take it?" His silence stretched. Longer. He finally looked up. His eyes moved between my parents and me. "You're making this bigger than it was." My father interrupted. "Mark doesn't need to answer that." I shook my head. "Yes, he does." My mother scoffed. "You're still bitter." "No, I'm finished pretending." Mark inhaled slowly. Then he said something I never expected to hear. "I didn't think they'd throw you out." The porch went completely quiet. My father blinked. What? Mark's voice dropped. "I just thought you'd get grounded." My mother stared at him. "Mark." He kept talking. "I needed the money. For what my father asked." Mark shrugged weakly. "Friends, car stuff." I panicked. "So I said Emily took it." The words came out flat, like something he had rehearsed privately for years. My mother's face drained of color. My father's voice hardened. "You lied." Mark didn't answer immediately. Then he nodded. Once, slowly. "Yes." The silence that followed felt heavier than anything before it. My mother looked at me, then back at him. "You told us you saw her." "I know." My father's jaw tightened. "You ruined your sister's life over $500, Mark swallowed. "I didn't think—" "No," my father snapped. "You didn't." Daniel remained quiet, observing. My mother's voice turned brittle. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" Mark laughed once, a tired, humorless sound. "Look at this conversation. You think I wanted to start it 20 years ago?" My father turned toward me. "You should have defended yourself." "I did. You should have insisted." "I did. You should have told us the truth." "I did." The words landed with quiet force. My father had no answer. My mother's eyes moved slowly between the three of us. As if trying to reconstruct an entire history she suddenly realized might have been wrong. Mark spoke again. "I didn't know they'd kick you out. That wasn't my decision. But you let it happen." I studied his face. 20 years had aged him, lines around the eyes, a certain heaviness in his posture. "What happened after I left?" I asked. He shrugged. "Life. You stayed." "Yes, everything went back to normal." He hesitated, then shook his head. "No." My father spoke sharply. "That's enough." But Mark didn't stop. "You know what the worst part was," he said. "What you disappeared." I thought about calling, but I didn't know what to say. "You could have said the truth." He looked at the ground again. "Yeah." My mother finally spoke. Her voice sounded fragile now. "We didn't know." Daniel stepped forward slightly. "You chose not to know." She looked at him. "What does that mean?" "It means when a child insists their innocent, responsible parents investigate." My father bristled. "You don't understand our family." Daniel nodded politely. "You're right, but I understand accountability." No one spoke for several seconds. The sun had nearly set. The porch light above us flickered on automatically. My father finally looked at me again. His expression had shifted. Less anger, more uncertainty. You've done well, he said quietly. Yes. You don't need to keep punishing us. I almost smiled. I'm not punishing you. Then what are you doing? I thought about my grandmother's house, her kitchen, her quiet voice, her porch light that never turned off. I'm protecting my life. My mother's shoulders lowered slightly. Mark looked at me again. For the first time, there was something like regret in his expression. You deserved better, he said. Maybe. But that wasn't the point anymore. Daniel glanced at his watch. Then he looked at me. You have options, he said quietly. What kind of options? He nodded toward my parents. Choices about how this ends. I looked at my family, the people who had once decided my life in a single evening. Now they were waiting for my decision. I looked at the three of them and realized something strange. For years I had imagined this moment differently, louder, sharper, maybe with more satisfaction in it. I had thought that if the truth ever came out, I would feel something dramatic, vindication, relief, triumph. Instead, I mostly felt tired, not because I doubted myself, because some debts can't be repaid by an apology or a confession. They just become part of the architecture of your life. My father was the first to speak again. His voice had lost its earlier force. We made a mistake. Daniel said nothing. He didn't need to. My mother looked at me with a kind of rigid disbelief, as if the facts were clear now, but her pride still refused to sit down beside them. A mistake, I said. She flinched slightly at my tone. Not because it was cruel, because it was calm. My father nodded once. Yes. I looked at Mark. He was leaning against the porch railing now, his shoulders lower than before. The confidence had gone out of him completely. It was more than a mistake, I said. No one interrupted. You threw a 14-year-old child out of the house. My mother opened her mouth, then stopped. She knew there was nothing useful to add. Daniel shifted beside me, still quiet, still steady. The evening air had turned cooler. A porch light glowed over our heads. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once and then stopped. My father rubbed a hand over his face. What do you want us to say? That question almost made me laugh, because it arrived 20 years too late. I don't know, I said honestly. That you were sorry, we are. I looked at my mother. She still hadn't said it. Not directly. Instead, she asked the question that revealed more than any apology could have. So that's it. I tilted my head slightly. What do you mean, you just cut us off? Daniel glanced at me, then looked away again. He knew that answer belonged to me. I folded my arms loosely. You already did that once. That was different, my mother said quickly, how her lips pressed together. My father tried instead. You were a child, yes. And now you're an adult, yes. So we should be able to resolve this. Resolve? Another clean word for a messy thing. I looked at Mark again. He still wouldn't quite meet my eyes for long. You don't want resolution, I said. You want relief. My father frowned. That's not fair. No, I said. It's accurate. The silence returned. This time it stayed longer. My mother looked toward the street, then back at the house behind me. A nice house. Quiet neighborhood. Flower beds near the porch. The life I had built without them standing inside it. That was part of what unsettled her. Not just that I had succeeded, that I had done it beyond her reach. Mark finally spoke. His voice sounded rough now. I should have told the truth. Yes. A long time ago. Yes. He nodded once. I know. That was probably the most honest sentence he had ever said to me. It landed, but not in the way he probably hoped. Honesty helps, but it does not rewind. My father straightened slightly. We're not asking for money anymore. I almost smiled at that phrasing, as if they were withdrawing a normal request. Daniel adjusted his cuffs. Then he said very politely, "That's wise." My mother ignored him. She was still looking at me. "You're really not going to help us?" There it was, the last shape of the visit. Not remorse, need. I could hear my grandmother's voice in my head then, not in words she had actually said, in the tone she used when she wanted me to slow down and look clearly at what was in front of me. People can disappoint you, but that doesn't mean life has to. I took a slow breath. "No," I said. My mother blinked. No. After everything, I almost asked what everything 14 years of food and shelter before exile, a front porch demand for $450,000, a lie they never questioned. But I didn't. Because some questions answer themselves. My father's shoulders lowered. For the first time that evening, he looked old. Not powerful, not certain, just old. Mark pushed himself off the railing and stood straighter. He looked at me then, directly. "I ruined your life," he said. The sentence came out flat. No performance, no excuse. I thought about that. Then I shook my head. No. All three of them looked at me. "You didn't ruin my life," I said. "You removed me from the wrong one." No one spoke after that. The sentence hung between us with a strange kind of stillness. It was the truth. Not the dramatic kind. The useful kind. Because everything good in my adult life had begun the night my grandmother opened her door. The warmth, the safety, the work, the business, the peace. None of it had come from the house that threw me out. Daniel looked at me then, and in his expression I saw something like approval, not for the pain, for the clarity. My mother glanced at my father. He didn't move, didn't argue, didn't try again. Mark looked down at the porch boards one last time. Then he nodded slightly, as if he finally understood that confession and consequence are not the same thing. I stepped back toward the door. No one tried to stop me. That more than anything told me the conversation was over. My hand rested on the doorknob. I looked at them once more. The family I had lost, and the strangers they had become. Then I went inside and closed the door. The house was quiet after they left. Not empty. Quiet. There's a difference. Empty feels like something is missing. Quiet feels like something has finally stopped demanding your attention. I stood in the hallway for a moment with my hand still resting on the doorknob. The porch light cast a pale square across the entry rug. Their shadows were gone. Their car engine faded at the end of the block. And just like that, 20 years of unfinished conversation ended in less than an hour. I locked the door. Then I walked into the kitchen and turned on the small lamp above the sink. The same kind of light my grandmother used to leave on at night. Soft, practical. Enough to make a room feel inhabited. I made tea. Chamomile. Not because I was shaken, because rituals matter after difficult things. The kettle warmed slowly. The cabinet door still stuck a little in damp weather. I had been meaning to fix it for months. Life goes on in details. That's one of the things exile taught me. No matter how dramatic the pain feels in the moment, most healing happens in ordinary rooms, with ordinary habits. I carried the mug into the living room and sat in the chair by the window. On the side table beside me was a framed picture of my grandmother in her garden. Sun hat, gloves, a look on her face that was half patience, half suspicion. She always looked like she expected weeds to try something clever. I smiled. "You were right," I said out loud. Not because she had predicted this exact day, because she had understood something much earlier than I did. That safety is not always found where it should have been. Sometimes it is found where it is offered. There had been a time in my 20s when I thought I might need my parents to understand what they had done. Need them to say the right words. Need them to look at me and see what they had broken. But understanding is not the same as repair, and regret is not the same as belonging. I learned that slowly. Building my company helped, not because work replaces family, because work gave me evidence, proof that I could build something stable with my own hands, that I could create trust where trust had once been broken. My firm started as one desk, one laptop, and one client who was willing to take a chance on me after I helped untangle a regional freight disaster. Now we handled multi-state supply recovery plans and emergency operations, consulting for companies too large to admit how vulnerable they were until something failed. I had 10 employees, a leased office, a waiting list. I had contracts, payroll routines. I had a life no one in my family had helped create. And more importantly, I had a life they could not define for me anymore. A week after the porch visit, Mark called. I let it ring twice before answering. His voice was lower than usual, not polished, not defensive, just tired. Hi. Hi. A pause. I wasn't sure you'd pick up. I wasn't sure either. He let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh. I keep thinking about that night. I knew which one he meant. The kitchen. The envelope. The backpack. I do too, I said. I was a stupid kid. Yes, I know that doesn't fix it. No. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I kept telling myself I didn't mean for it to go that far. I looked at my tea. Steam rising in slow curls. That was for you, I said. What do you mean it was for you to live with? He didn't answer. Because he knew I was right. Intentions matter, but not as much as outcomes. What happens now? He asked finally. I thought about that. About the years between us. About the fact that blood can remain technically true while emotionally becoming irrelevant. You figure out what kind of man tells the truth before it's useful, I said. He was silent for several seconds. Then he said quietly, That's fair. We hung up after that, not warmly, not coldly, just done. My parents didn't call again. Maybe pride stopped them. Maybe clarity did. Maybe they finally understood that access is not something you can demand after abandoning responsibility. I heard through a cousin that my mother had started telling people she always worried about how things ended. That sounded like her. A version of remorse polished for public use. I didn't respond. My grandmother's lawyer sent over the final paperwork on her old house 2 days later. I had kept it all these years. Not because it was worth much on paper, because it was the first place I had ever truly felt chosen. I decided not to sell it. Instead, I had the porch repaired, repainted the trim, planted new roses where my grandmother's had thinned out over time. The porch light still comes on every evening at dusk, automatic now, but I still notice it, every time. Sometimes I sit out there with tea after work and think about that first night, 14 years old, backpack in one hand, no plan, no money, no certainty, and then a door opening. You're safe here. It took me years to understand that those 4 words did not just save me for a night. They gave me a blueprint for my entire adult life. Safety, consistency, no performance, no condition, just room. If you're listening to this and you've ever been made to feel like being left behind meant being unwanted, remember this. Sometimes the life that saves you begins the moment the wrong door closes. And if someone quiet kept you alive when louder people failed, you honor that. Say it out loud. Tell the truth about who stayed. If this story stayed with you, pass it on to someone who needs that reminder. And if you want more stories about family survival and the quiet ways people reclaim their lives, stay with this channel. Sometimes the person who saved you wasn't the one who raised you. It was the one who opened the door.